What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I was listening to this week's episode of Kailyn Lowry's Coffee Convos podcast as I was getting ready to shoot today's videos, and let's just say in this episode she is just so real and so raw. I really appreciated it as she compared her mother's battle with alcohol addiction with her own battle to kind of break out of this toxic cycle that she had in her relationship with Chris Lopez. I'm really looking forward to discussing that part with you guys, but of course I always recap her podcasts in order, and she's got so many gems. So let's start at the very beginning where she talks about spending her Christmases alone. As we all know, Kail now has 4 kids by 3 different fathers. So holidays are really difficult in her household. If she had all of her kids in the house and then had to drive them out to their individual fathers for one holiday so that she could split the day with them, it would be impossible to actually have a Christmas. And so that's why she's like, you know what? At this point, I don't even care. Guys, have your kids for the holidays and then I'll have them for like other times. It's really not that huge of a deal. So she says this year, like, she hasn't really like considered the kids getting each other gifts. She says like, you know what, after this podcast, that's something that I'm gonna ask them. Do you guys wanna get each other gifts? And maybe at the end of the day or Boxing Day or something, then you guys can all open your gifts together. I don't know, but for right now, it's not really something that is top of mind for her. I find it a little bit sad or like curious that she doesn't have friends to spend the Christmas holidays with. She's lived in Dover for a really long time. Her, Joe, and V kind of like put on this very like, what do you call it? Modern family, happy family kind of a thing. So why wouldn't she really be planning to spend the holidays at Joe and V's house with Isaac? You know what I mean? Or would it be unfair for the other kids? I don't know. I'm really curious about you guys' take. The conversation then switches gears into careers. You know, she's like, you know, sometimes there are people who like, you know, I'm meeting them just like a normal person meets people and they don't know anything about me. And when they ask me, what do I do for work? I just say that I'm a podcaster because I get all nervous. And I don't want to tell people I'm on television because I don't want to be judged and I just don't want all that kind of, you know, awkwardness. And so her friend Lindsay, her co-host Lindsay, chimes in as well, and she's been complaining about, you know, her husband's family for a while, y'all. She complains that her husband's family, everyone's got degrees and then they've got traditional jobs, so she feels as though she's judged for not really having any of that. She's got more of a non-traditional job, and Kail says, yeah, like it kind of feels as though people lose respect for you when you tell them that you do podcasting or whatever as a job, especially reality television, and people act like you don't really make money doing these things. And she's like, I can assure you guys, I am cashing real checks, paying my bills with real money. And then she goes off on a little bit of a tangent about how she stays at the Ritz-Carlton, which we all know costs a lot of money. So she's like, you know, when I'm there and people give me dirty looks, I'm like, how do you think I got here? I'm spending real money to be here. I make just as much money as you do, so don't judge me. And I feel as though, you know what, that's another pretty relatable kind of a conversation there. You know, like when I was working like a really white collar job in the tech industry, people were very like, oh, that's amazing, like asking all kinds of questions about that. But since being laid off and just kind of doing YouTube for now until I figure out my next move, it's kind of like, okay, so you do YouTube, but what do you do? You know, people are like that. People still don't really understand the creative economy yet. So it is a very awkward thing. And so I could totally get, you know, where they're coming from with that. Next, we get into her relationship with her newest baby, Creed, and, you know, the relationship with her mother and Chris Lopez in the final half of the podcast. So she says, listen, bonding with my baby Creed has been quite difficult because he's not really sleeping, which means I'm not really sleeping, and I'm finding myself very exhausted and stressed out, so it's hard to bond. So when I talked to my therapist about it last week, she told me that, like, you know, for now the kid doesn't really recognize you as a person, he just recognizes you as a source of life. It's not until around 6 months that they start internalizing different things. So like, you know, your kind of like stress or the way you treat them, the vibe, like, you know, whatever it is that they're receiving from you, the energy, that's when they start internalizing it. So like, you know, you can damage your kids like emotionally, psychologically as young as 6 months old at that point. Now, if that Ritz-Carlton flex wasn't enough of a flex for you guys a little bit earlier, Kail had to hit you with another flex. This girl is talking about how she's got so much money that she just keeps changing phones as if they are underwear. She's like, you know what? In fact, recently I dropped my phone in the shower. Pause, what were you doing with your phone in the shower, sis? And I had to just go and get another one. And I was like, she didn't even say that the phone was broken. I have dropped my phone so many places, including like concrete steps of a metro station, and it's cracked but still working. Yes, I'm getting glass shards in my thumb, but it is still working, okay? And she goes, you know, another humble brag. She goes, in fact, you know what? I just got that after my phone thing, but I'm still upgrading to another one real soon. You know, these teen mom girls and money, they treat it like it's water, and it is never going to run out, I tell you. So, you know, when it comes to like her home life and stuff, remember, we talked about this in last week's podcast, but Kail was getting suspended a lot when she was in the 9th grade, and then she eventually did end up getting expelled. And she opened up a little bit more about why that was. According to Kail, her mom was really at the height of her addiction at this point. In fact, she had gone away to rehab. She had signed away temporary custody of Kail to the neighbor. Her family had tried to step in. The mom's like cousins and sisters, I believe it was, tried to step in to take guardianship of Kail, but the mom refused and just signed her over to like a neighbor instead. And Kail really muses about why it was that the state never stepped in. And she actually gets into it a little bit later, which, you know, I was quite surprised by her answer. But anyway, she's like, you know what? My most recent relationship was just such a toxic cycle that while I was going through it, I started to think about my mom and her own battle with addiction. You know, no one wants to be addicted to anything. You know, like, you know that something is bad for you, and yet you just keep doing it because you're addicted. My relationship was so toxic that I just kept making like these poor decisions. It's like my mom making those poor decisions to keep on drinking. And it's just, you know, it keeps going on and on and on. And like, you really can't help yourself. And I was like, girl, that is so raw. That is so real. That is so freaking relatable. I think so many of us can relate to, you know, just continuing on in this toxic cycle where you're like breaking up, going back together, like all this just mess. Listen, we're not all out here like filing PFAs, getting physical in our relationships or anything like that. The way Kail has, she currently actually has like an upcoming trial date for this charge that she caught for allegedly assaulting Chris. But like, it still is relatable in some sense. I think we've all kind of gotten caught up in this cycle of like a never ending, super duper toxic relationship. So it was really interesting to see her kind of relate that back to feeling empathy for her mom and her mom's own battle with addiction. She's like, you know, it really is cyclical, and that is 100% true. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting to me, because earlier she's talking about people in my mom's family wanted to step in and take custody of me to give me a better life than she could have given me, but she didn't want to. And the state did not step up as well. And like, I was suffering in school because of it, like, you know, in my general life as well. How did she get away with this? Well, according to Kail, her family in Pennsylvania at the time was well known and wealthy. I found that interesting because the home that she showed us on 16 and Pregnant was not particularly notable. You know, it was kind of like on the lower middle class scale, if I'm remembering correctly, that she talked about how her and her mother lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. Where's the wealth? You know, like maybe her mom drank it away, I don't know, but that's what she was saying. She's like, her mom got away with so much because the family was well known, and then we all know how things are with the father as well, right? Like the father isn't wealthy either. So I'm like, which side, sis? The mom knew the judge, and so she would get sentenced to rehab instead of jail time, instead of losing custody, etc., just because of these alleged connections that she is said to have had. But I don't remember seeing anything like, you know, if anything, Joe's family, to me, like if he told me his family was well known and wealthy, I would have been like, yeah, I could see it. Like their house was massive, but I just didn't see that with Kail. So I'm a little bit curious about that. And I'm also curious why she doesn't exactly have a relationship with these relatives who tried to save her from her mom. You know, Kail is always talking about how she's got no family, but it seems as though she had some people who really loved her and really wanted to help her and really tried to help her. So where's that relationship with those people? She only talks about having a relationship with like 2 cousins, and that's about it. But I'm really curious about these aunts and then her mom's cousins. You know what I mean? It's all very interesting. Guys, you know what? This episode of Coffee Convos was quite good. I listened at 1.5x speed, and I fast forward through all the parts of Lindsay just to get to the Kail's for this recap. And, you know, Kail had a lot of really interesting sound bites, you know, talking about splitting Christmas, not even splitting, giving Christmas to the father, because she is in way too much of a pickle with 3 baby daddies. Like shuttling kids around all day is just not the move. And I think it's a great lesson to people to be careful who you have kids by, and to not just, you know, pop them out every time you have a new boyfriend. Look at the mess it gets you. Lonely on Christmas. Like, that's genuinely quite sad. And then I also thought that it was quite interesting how she talked about being judged for having like a new found kind of career path, like a creative entrepreneur. Like, people still don't understand what exactly it is, and so they act as though, you know, although you're making real money, it's not respectable money, and that's not exactly fair. And you know, the difficulty bonding with her baby due to a lack of sleep, and then of course relating her toxic cycle to her mother's own toxic cycle, and then talking about, you know, how her mother's addiction impacted her as a young student in the 9th grade, being constantly suspended and then eventually expelled from school. And of course, how wealth alleged wealth, I'll say, played in a role in her mom being able to continue on this cycle. Perhaps if she were poor, she would have been put in jail, and maybe she would have sobered up over there, because there's no alcohol at the canteen in jail, I'm hearing. Yeah, it was all interesting, you guys. I definitely recommend this episode of the Coffee Convos podcast. But in the meantime, what do you think about everything she said? I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. That's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.